crime writing in India, especially crime fiction in India, especially when we were growing up, I mean, readers of my vintage. I hope I'm not giving away my age. We used to tuck into Nancy Drew, when we were tiny tots. Nancy Drew, Famous Five, Hardy Boys, and stuff. And there was a murder mystery. There could be a burglary, and they used to crack it. And then we were all enamored by the picnic hampers that Nancy Drew used to carry around, the kind of food they used to tuck into. So the curiosity was both about the food they eat and the cases they crack. Of course, we had the good old murder mystery in the vernacular. I mean, Satyajit Ray, the Peluda series, Byomkesh Bakshi, even the good old Mr. Ruskin Bond. There's a short story called Death by Arsenic. I don't know how many of you have read that, where a grandma cracks the case, where a wife poisons her husband very slowly using dose of arsenic. Pretty morbid, but that's how it is. So I just want to ask the panel, I mean, how have you seen crime writing evolve? I mean, crime fiction evolve? And vis-a-vis the response from both publishers as well as readers. Harini, if you would like to go first. Harini writes about trees, she writes about lakes, she writes about all kinds of stuff in Bangalore. She also dabbles in crime fiction.
Yes, so thanks very much for having me. It's very nice to talk also. I'm very curious to know what the other authors have to say here because this is a very fun panel, I think. Again, I'm thinking back of how the kind of detective fiction I grew up with, and I loved golden age fiction. So, and what we had was foreign fiction, Dorothy Sayers or Agatha Christie, and writers like that. So, I think what I am really enjoying about historical crime fiction right now, which is the genre I write in, is the huge flourishing of a lot of writers. For instance, Sujata Massey, who writes on Bombay, or Abir Mukherjee, who writes on Calcutta, my own books on Bangalore, lovely books on Delhi. So historical crime is something, I mean, seeing things that we can relate to is very, very nice. And also, I'm seeing just a flowering. You have the horror end of the spectrum, the more dark noir type of mysteries. You have the very light, cozy, light-hearted things, which is what I write. The entire spectrum, the diversity. I think we had Feluda, for instance, which is very nice growing up, but not that much of variety and diversity. So what I find very nice is for every reader, there's something to their taste now. So that's something I'm really enjoying in looking at the variety of just what's on the bookshelves nowadays.
Anuja? Just one question, Anuja. I mean, your Zoya Factor became a movie. So when you write a book these days, in the back of your mind, do you have this, could it become a screenplay? I mean, does it weigh you down, or you don't even think about that?
No, it's interesting. Hello, sorry, wow, I'm so loud. The book you have here today that we're discussing, Club You to Death, is also coming out as a film on Netflix in March. Okay. And it's got a lovely ensemble cast with Pankaj Tripathi playing the detective and Sara Ali Khan, Dimple Kapadia, lots of exciting, shiny talent there. So, and that's a different thing, As writers, I don't think we can ignore the Bollywood call when it comes, or anywhere else, because of the, if you're hoping to make a decent living by writing, you can't ignore offers for people to convert something into film. But you do realize that is its own creature, right? If you're a reader and you're a reader, then, and you want to see the author's vision, then please read the book, because that will be, that's the thing that the writer came up with, right? The film will always be the director's vision. In a good way, it would be the director's vision. In a horrible way, it would be a terrible mishmash of, the studio's ideas on what should be done and so on and so forth. So, which is why I enjoy reading books, because when I read a book, I feel I really met the author, because it's the author's vision and it's my imagination taking it forward. If there's a description, I'm filling in the gaps, and the way I fill in the gaps is different from you. So, nobody reads the same book. We all read a different book because it plays out in our head. So that's my take on the whole book to movie thing. Okay. Like Harini said, Agatha Christie was a staple. I studied in a boarding school. I had nuns watching everything I read. And thankfully, they seemed to think that it was okay to read murder mysteries. Like Mills and Boone and all, but Agatha, murder and all is fine. So a very warped sense of morality we grew up with, and I really did enjoy that. And I love when I think what we all love is the psychological workings of people's minds and the motives and the slippery slopes on which they get themselves on and they start doing things they never thought they would do a while ago. So exploring all that is great fun.
Kiran, just one question to you. I mean, I read your book, The Kitty Party Murder. I mean, I just felt there was an inversion there. An inversion in the sense that you have this lady in the apartment. She's very reluctant to investigate. So I'm presuming she's Dr. Watson. I'm just presuming, right? And there's a detective outside who's constantly prodding her. And I'm presuming she is Sherlock Holmes. And technically, it's Dr. Watson who cracks the case. Was it something you consciously worked on? Because you're reading the book and like she's very reluctant. She doesn't want to investigate. She's thinking, why am I being drawn into this? But she's also being curious about it. And then towards end, everything, the knot is untangled towards the end of the climax. And she's the one who's actually doing it. Was it something conscious?
No, I don't think that's a very interesting point you've brought up, because I never really thought of it that way. It was, the protagonist, K. Mehra, who's also the protagonist of The Reluctant Detective, and the next in the series, which is heaven knows when it'll be out. But she is not a detective. She has, as you said, absolutely no interest in detective business. But she is very curious. She has nothing to occupy her time. And she wants to get, into the nitty-gritty of things, roped into it by her detective friend, Runa, whom she's terrified of. She cracks the case because of her curiosity, I guess, that leads her to see things that other people can't see.
Yeah.
And the fact that she's not trained for this. So she comes to it with a very open mind. I think I'm sort of championing the underdog here because we've grown up with like Perry Mason and all these hard-boiled detectives who are like totally into the forensics and into the, investigation. And this one has no clue of what is to be done, but somehow she gets it done. I think that's what I was aiming for.
Yeah. Tarun, coming to your book, it's broad canvas, espionage, spies, and leaping across continents, right? Was it tricky? Because it's based on a bit of non-fiction, something that really happened, and then you're spinning a yarn around it, right? So sensitivities are involved, governments are involved, probably the RAW and the IB and ISI, they're all involved, So did you have to jump through hoops to get this book done in terms of approvals, bureaucrats, red tape?
Hi, good morning. So let me answer that first question straight away. So not really. I think the trick really is in balancing reality with fiction. So you're not trying to demean history in any which way. You can interpret it slightly differently because no one really knows what happens in the context of some of those historical events, right? For example, we're talking about the assassination of a former Prime Minister of India in Russia, right? So anecdotally, everybody knows who we are speaking about. But was it an assassination? Was it a natural death? Was he poisoned? Was he not poisoned? Is a controversy that stands to today. So there's no question of anybody approving stuff like that.
So let me just button now. So would you clarify on this? Because the myth is that the KGB had bugged the room and they actually listened to him struggling for his life. But then if they went and rescued him, then their cover is blown, therefore they didn't step in. Is it true or is it just a myth?
I have no idea. That's the most honest response. And nobody in the
You're
KGB...
playing it safe.
I'm playing it honest as well, but nobody in the KGB or the RAW is ever going to tell you what the truth was, right? So that's where it lies. So I think...
Tashkent, right?
Tashkent,
Yeah.
So as long as you're not misinterpreting what actually happened, if I was to say that he walked out of that alive, maybe that's demeaning history a little bit. But other than that, you have the creative liberty of writing around that particular event, especially when it was subjective in the assessment of it.
Yeah. I just want to ask this to all of you. I mean, as the authors of these books, the crime thrillers or a murder mystery, whatever, you know who the culprit is when you start writing, right? When you do the one line, you know exactly who the murderer is. And then you're layering it, you're throwing in red herrings at us, and then you kind of untangle it in the climax, right? So how do you go about this writing process? Because for you, there is no thrill, there's no suspense. The suspense is for us. So how do you go about this, the writing mechanism?
I'm not a plotter. I never know. I start with an incident, I throw the characters together
Like
in
you
a
don't know
room.
the murderer at the
I
beginning.
have no idea what the murder, who's getting murdered, who is the murderer. Slowly, I'm getting slightly better at it in book 4, so I have a vague idea. But the moment I know, the thrill is gone for me. So I actually change it along the way.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, I can't plot. It's
Okay.
The thrill is gone. It's very boring. If I'm bored, the reader is going to be bored. So it's very character driven. They have to get together and tell me what they're going to do next.
Anuja? Like, do you know the murderer from the beginning?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I do. This is a very radical new way
I
of
know.
working. I'm very inspired. But I do, and that's what makes it tricky because it's like you can't judge if it's good because you can't surprise yourself.
Yeah.
You know, so if at the ending you're trying to pull a rabbit out of a hat, you know the rabbit is in the hat, so you can't surprise yourself.
Yeah.
So you can't judge it in that sense, like, is it good? Did I do it? And so you're very dependent on your first, you know, the people who are close to you, who you trust, who are your first readers, to say, what do you think? There's that. So it's always, it's hard for you to get an idea. Yes, of course, you have to hide it, but you have to leave enough clues so that clever people who are the kind of people who read these books will find enough in it to say, I picked up on that. I know what she's doing there. No. So you have to hide it, but imperfectly, and leave some stuff. So there's a lot of scaffolding below the skin of it. When you see it on the surface, it seems like hearty care, but there is a lot more mathematics to it than, say, if you were writing a straight up story or, you know, coming of age novel or a romance or whatever it is. So,
Kiran, your book, in fact, for a minute, I thought there was a supernatural element in the staircase. I was a bit spooked reading that.
I have to bring in ghosts everywhere.
Yeah. And then, of course, you untangle it towards the end. Was it a very conscious thing the way you worked at it?
The supernatural element?
Yeah.
I love ghosts.
The staircase thing.
Yeah. I love them because, I mean, they add something that you can't really explain.
Yeah.
And then they throw you off, as I'm sure they threw you off as well. So I do love to bring in the supernatural.
And you know the murderer from the beginning?
No, I work a lot like Harini, in fact. I have no clue.
Huh?
I have no clue. So I start with a
Seriously?
situation. Yeah, I start with a situation and the premise as this is what has happened. And as I build on it, I keep writing. And it's not a very time-efficient process. Because, you know, you go back and forth and you have to keep rewriting and reworking and doing all kinds of stuff because it's not fitting together. And then you kill off somebody and then you realize, no, I shouldn't have killed that person off. I should have left him alive. And then you bring him back from the dead. And I don't recommend it. I think Anuja's process is better.
Much more efficient. My husband and daughter are sitting here. They keep pointing out these mistakes to me. So-and-so was supposed to be dead. You brought them back. That was version 1. You know, this is version 2A.
but more seriously, sorry, butting in, but is, you know, there's it's not just a who done it. There's also why done it and how done it.
Yeah.
Which is also very important.
Yeah.
And even if you know who, there's something in it, so there's that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that is very important. The whole motive, the character, and why it happens.
Tarun, how was the process for you?
I'm as disorganized as these two ladies here. So,
We are the majority.
no, so it is chaotic, it is time consuming, it means rewriting multiple times because you suddenly find that a large part of your story has changed because of the connotation that you've just given a particular chapter. For me, for example, the manuscript that finally got published was version 73. So it's a lot of rewriting.
Seriously?
It is. So it's a lot of rewriting. And in the context of my book, at least, we're sort of spread across 100 years, right? So you twist something in 2010 and you suddenly find the character is like 4-year-old when he should be 40. So those things just need to be rewritten again and again. I think it's quite exciting actually to write it this way because you can keep adding layers without being constrained by a thought process you set out in the beginning. So as your characters evolve, as your writing evolves, your story and whatever has gone on in the background can evolve as well. So I find it more relaxing to write it this way, more creative. But there's a lot to be said for being far more organized as well, at least in terms of time.
Okay. Now this question is to Harini. I mean, you deal with old Bangalore, 1920s and stuff. Is it because of a strong sense of nostalgia you have for old Bangalore? And, you know, I mean, obviously you love the trees in Bangalore. You wrote a book on cities and trees, right?
Cities and canopies, yeah.
Canopies, yes, yeah. And then now you've written a book on water bodies and stuff.
Water bodies, yeah.
Yeah. So is it also about some kind of catharsis dealing with old Bangalore?
It's therapy, I'll have to tell you. When I'm really, you know, bothered by the city and its traffic and its dust and I immerse myself in 1920s Bangalore, it's that. But it's really also, it's a perfect time to think of many, many issues, you know, golden age, right? So women's suffrage, because that's the time that in Bangalore, women are asking for the right to vote for the first time and actually getting the right to sit in the representative assembly. There's, of course, the whole independence movement backdrop going up. Women are stepping out of the house so much, you know, caste issues are being discussed. But there's also, you know, the trees and lakes, of course, the biodiversity of Bangalore. But for me, it's that we've always talked about Bangalore as being a cosmopolitan city. And I think we use the word cosmopolitan in many ways. But for me, what that means is it's a very accepting city. It always was. And in a time when India is, well, the world over is, I think lines are being drawn very rigidly. I think it's very nice to go back to that time and see what was it that made this city such a melting pot that you could come in from different places, no matter what your background, and feel Bangalorean after some time and become part of the city. So a lot of it is that. A lot of it is just that my research, my academic research is so much on 1920s Bangalore. I found that it was a very interesting time to help me think through why are we the way we are today. A lot of that is obviously historical events and contingency. So it lets you get a sense of that past, and immersing yourself through the minds of people is a much better way to, because I write fiction and non-fiction, right? So I find non-fiction is you can describe, but helping to figure out why it was the way it was. Fiction is it's a very nice way to do that. You can get inside the minds of people and try and think through things. And that's what I love. That's why 1920s.
And the other question is you place them in the 1920s. So in terms of procedural, I'm getting technical about this. You don't have cell phone towers, right? Nowadays, most murder mysteries or missing cases are cracked through when was the last call placed, which cell phone tower is involved, right? So does it also give you that freedom to inquire more, add more layers to it?
Absolutely. Right? So she's Kaveri, my detective, is always looking at fingerprints and blood typing, and it's great fun for me as a scientist to look at what did they know about the science of blood typing, for instance, in those days. But also the way I write, I do cozy mysteries very emphatically. I'm never going to have a forensic.
Is it an oxymoron, cozy mystery?
Yes, but it is. But that's the genre that so many people I think like and love. My own taste preferences for that. So I'll never write a psychological horror kind
You make the slitting a throat sound sexy.
Absolutely. So for instance, today so much of it is forensic science. You'll have to have someone cutting up a corpse and looking for clues. I can't go there. Yeah. That's not the way I'm going to write. So this is very comforting because people are looking, it's the old era where your brains, and you're looking at character a lot. The detective is saying this person is like this, so they would have done something like that. So that's my comfort level also with writing. That's the kind of books I like writing.
So next is to Anuja and Kiran. I mean, isn't it also a social commentary, the kind of books you write? It's also about what happens in apartment complexes. And all of us are part of residence welfare associations and, the kind of angst that happens. So there's also a commentary in all these books. Both your books, there's commentary about high society, clubs, associations. So it's also about a character study of a society at large. It's not just there's a murder and who did it. It's also about the layering and people around it.
Yeah, for me, a lot of the joy of writing is in that, getting inside the heads of people and all their little bit of politicking and their angst with each other and all the beef and the tea, what my children call, and who's salty about what. So that's a lot of the joy in the writing comes from there. And nothing happens in a vacuum. Like earlier I used to write, I still write. I'm single-handedly trying to come up with a genre called rom-com. Romance, crime and comedy. So that is what I enjoy writing. And neither does a romance ever happen in a vacuum. While you're busy falling in love, something is happening politically in the country, your mother saying, go and buy me 2 liters of milk from the dairy, all that is also still going on, So you can't leave that out because otherwise it's not authentic, it's not real. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Everything happens in a busy, buzzing ecosystem where no one gives a damn that you're falling in love, and beyond a point, no one gives a damn that somebody got murdered because there's other stuff going on as well. So you can't pull it out and leave the other threads out of it. So, and for me, other threads are sometimes I have a little bit of an agenda.
Okay.
Like in The Fast and the Dead, I talk a lot about how I find it very interesting how societies everywhere in India, like an RWS, split on the topic of stray dogs, for example. Yeah. And it's a topic that makes a lot of people really violent and aggressive about whether they should be fed or they should be, put down or whatever it is. So it'll be a tiny thing, but every tiny thing becomes a massive war somehow, waging on WhatsApp groups. And there's so you're not just saying something to another person, you're saying something to another person with 400 people are also listening in. Yeah. So that's a thing, like in 1920s Bangalore versus my book, which is in 1920s Bangalore. The difference is that the everyone is so hyper sensitized and everyone is so eager to take offense. They have technology at their disposal, and that's all kind of part of why the murder takes place as well as everything else. So I feel that it's just real and it's great fun. And I can sneak in the agendas that I want as well and try and plant my take on things. So I love that, the social commentary part.
Kiran?
So pretty much the same as Anuja said, except that I think societies are so fascinating. Where will I get such a vast range of characters to draw on? Each one so different with their own quirks and foibles and the kind of, as you mentioned, the stray dog spats. Then you have the parking spats. You have the water spats, throwing water from balcony spats. You have, I mean, we are all familiar with, there is war every day on the WhatsApp groups. Like somebody threw something from your balcony to my balcony and all that kind of stuff. It's amazing the kind
Don't
of
smoke in toilets.
Yeah. So why do I leave out so much material? I can exploit it. I live in one and I can totally exploit it. And I think, yes, the agendas do come in. And I started the first book, Reluctant Detective, because I wanted to point out the fact that many women take a sabbatical when they have a child and they don't really get back completely into the corporate workforce. What happens to these women? What do they do? So that was the thought with which I started it. And it grows from there.
I found it very interesting. The child's voice in your book was so authentic. The way the child speaks, the English, the little boy speaks, is so authentic. I mean, generally in books, people tend to speak the same way, most characters. But I think there was a lot of emphasis on the way the child spoke. I mean, how did you work out that?
I totally cannibalized my son. When he was 5, of course, and I was a blogger for the longest. I was one of what they call the earliest mommy bloggers. So I chronicled his childhood, and he's going to one day go into therapy and blame me completely for that. But that voice was there in that blog, and I used it in the books.
Okay. So Tarun, I mean, how was it for you in terms of, because you're dealing with a big, broad canvas, right? Were there people you lent on in terms of IB or RAW or local cops? How do you work in this process? Because there are a lot of facts that underpin your book, right? And you spring from that.
So I'm blessed in as much as my parents were both bureaucrats. So it gives me access to at least an understanding of how the bureaucratic world works, which is some part of this book as well. The intelligence services are really hard to crack into, right? So we spoke to a couple of these guys when we were writing the book, but they're still extremely coy and hesitant to share anything about an operation that they've been part of. So their assistance would be reading the manuscript from the perspective of whether it's complete nonsense or whether it makes sense from how the intelligence agency would actually work. There's a little bit available online, but as Mr. Sood had said, the former big boss of the RAW, the best spies are the ones you've never heard of. So it's really hard to get into territories of ongoing operations, previous operations, because you just don't know what that's going to knock over, what sort of dominoes fall because you are now releasing some information which was not otherwise known. I have to say, I was quite surprised that even after retirement, they were as hesitant to share any information as they were. Normally, people are more willing to let go once they've retired, but in this case, there seems to be a lot of discipline that exceeds expectation.
So the X-Files remain X-Files.
For them, it seems to be, yeah. The X-Files remain X-Files. And in one of these conversations, they did say it, that it literally is that, because a previous operation that they were part of might still have some ongoing element to it today. There's no question of speaking about anything that actually happened during their careers. So you get obtuse references, but nothing real.
The other bit I want to get into is, how much do you all draw from the immediacy of life? I'm asking this because most of us know Ruskin Bond lost his dad when he was very young and he was traumatized by it. He was very close to his dad. And then his mother got married again and he had issues with his stepfather. And by coincidence, by remarkable coincidence, one of his short stories, the stepfather gets bumped off. He's thrown into a well. So in that sense, when you write your books, is there some pesky neighbor you want to bump off or a colleague who pisses you off at water cooler conversations you want to bump off and you just bump them off in the book? Honest answers.
Yeah. So, not on the bumping off, but for instance, why I write so much about feminist issues of women who wanted to read and write and were denied opportunities is a lot of it is very personal because, for instance, both my mother and mother-in-law were women in the born in the 1930s. My grandmother was born in 1908. She would have been Kaveri's, my detective's age. But none of them could study. So my grandmother had to stage a hunger strike with her sister when they were very small. And so my grandmother actually read and wrote 4 languages, was married at 12, had the usual 7 children, never managed to do anything. My mother and mother-in-law greatest regret even now was that they got admission into medical college and things like that and weren't allowed to study. So I think that sense of regret, loss that they have through the end of their lives, that stays on with me and is really very poignant if you think of it. That's what they can talk about at the end of their life. Not everything else at one time, but I couldn't do anything of my own to explore my identity. So that is my thread that comes through all of these. And in some sense, maybe it's catharsis, maybe it's a way to explore what it was. And maybe that's why Kaveri at least will get to do whatever she wants to do, because that's sort of bucking that trend for me. Bumping off, no, I've not had anybody I've hated so much. Maybe it'll happen at some point. You never know.
Anuja?
Yeah, totally. I mean, see, hey, we don't, like I said before, this is one of the primary joys of writing. We don't get paid very well in other manners, but this is a huge perk of the job, that you get to get all your angst out. You'll never need a therapist. Just put it in the damn book, and you can, just do this. And I'm all for it. And honestly, I mean, this actually reminds me like of, a real, maybe all are familiar with this movie, Khosla Ka Ghosla.
Yeah.
Where there is this man who harpos this man's house. Sorry, using a Hindi word. There's a builder, there's a crooked builder who takes over the family home, and this man is running from pillar to post trying to get his house back. And in that case, the actual writer of the book, this happened in his family, and his family lost the house.
Okay.
But for him, writing the script and then getting the movie made was kind of sweet revenge. And finally, he said, we made more money from the movie than we would have got from the sale of the house. So in a sense, I feel it sort of worked out, So there's that. And I think that everybody should pour themselves into their work, whatever their work happens to be. So when you win a race, if that's what you do, you're doing it for all these other demons you've got out there that you need to get rid of. And similarly with writing, this is what we do. We say the things that we couldn't say. We lie awake at night saying, damn, I should have said that. So it's fine. Your character can say that in a book tomorrow. And I should have murdered that person. Okay, that is not. But this is legally allowed. You can do this. So do it.
Kiran?
I always warn people around me, better be nice to me, I'm going to kill you off in my book. So, I think, of course, you write them down, you alter them subtly so that only they know that they are being spoken about, and then you kill them off.
Tarun?
So I bumped off a few people in this book, but nobody I hate as much to bump them off. But look, character development easiest. Now, when you're writing it of somebody you know, basing it of somebody you know, even the negative characters in this book are based off people I have a negative view on. So I've used names, and like I was saying, it'll be people who know that the reference is to them. But it just helps me a lot, keeping that negative persona in mind when I'm writing a negative character. And likewise, if I'm writing about a bureaucrat, of course, I have that in mind, for example, about how he is around his work. Makes life a lot simpler. But I'm going to be inspired here and bump off a few people I don't really like going forward.
You're inspiring murder here.
Why not?
So, is there a positive way for crime fiction in India now? I mean, the four of you are here. I remember reading a remarkable book by Udayan Mukherjee, A Death in the Himalaya. I mean, lovely book. Anita Naya does books on Boregowda series and from Bangalore. A lot of writers, Kalpana Swaminathan, a lot of writers. There's one Mr. Raman in Chennai. He writes mysteries based in Kunnur. Right? I think the detective is Atreya. So, a lot of books coming in the market. There seems to be a very desi version of the murder mystery, a splash of old monk, monsoon pitter-patter on the window panes, and a throat being slit, right? So how do you see this particular wave?
So what I've been very fascinated with, because my books are in different parts of the world, is the comparison with all kinds of genres. And especially in the US and the UK, I see that there's so much interest in books written in India, not just in India, in different parts of the world that they don't get to read about, which are very local in flavor. So I was initially worried. I'm not writing about Bombay. I'm not writing about Calcutta. I'm not writing about Delhi. Nobody know. I mean, outside India, people are thinking of colonial India. They only know these cities, right? Bangalore is not something that is going to come to their mind. It's only IT. Why would they be interested? But people are so fascinated in learning about, oh, in South India, people drank filter coffee, or, you know, all the little rituals that we do in a South Indian home, or those kinds of things. So there is this interest in Indian fiction that I find very interesting. Similarly, I mean, I like Atreya's books because, I mean, R.V. Raman's books about because I'm looking at Kunur and thinking, okay, this is very Agatha Christie-esque, but
Yes.
in a very different kind. There's one in an island, you know, and then
Yeah.
there's the whole thing with the serpents and the. So very interesting stuff that I am enjoying reading because there's so much set in place. I think we read also. Why were we reading murder mysteries? Of course, because we are interested in the clues, but we want to learn about different places, different parts of the world, and have fun while doing that learning, right? So I think these are to me, the alternative to literary fiction to read about place, and crime fiction set very much in place and time is really flourishing now. So that's what I am enjoying a lot. And interestingly, I'm finding people across the world are also enjoying this. So the same authors that we read, they're reading, which is fantastic.
Yeah. Anuja?
I think it's for me, you know, I mean, I'm reacting as a reader because I don't really know why certain trends happen. But for me, the joy of reading a well-written murder mystery is always the sense of satisfaction I get at the ending. There's something very neat about the way it ends. And if it's well done, you get a huge sense of satisfaction. There's a lot of books that you read, which, you know, where the style is beautiful and the writing is very evocative and there is character and there is atmosphere. But that little satisfaction of all the ends being tied up unexpectedly but neatly is something that comes in a really good whodunit. And you watch one for 2 hours, 3 hours, and at the ending, the closure, you're like, wow, I didn't think of that, and that's amazing. And there's a good sense of satisfaction, I think, when it's done. And nowadays, everything is so open-ended. No matter what we are doing, there's so many things in life that are just dragging on and open-ended, and things don't close, or it's artistic to leave it like that for people to figure out. There's something... you get a sense of a tick mark and a job well done when you finish a murder mystery and you're like, oh my God, I didn't know, you know, that it was going there. So I think it's that there's a very good sense of closure in a well-written whodunit.
I speak as a reader, as Anuja does. I have loved the recent books that have come out. There's Richa S. Mukherjee, who's written a series called Kanpur Khufia.
Okay.
It's about a detective called Prachanan Tripathi, set in Kanpur. It's very local, it's very rustic. He has a cow in his house, there's family mothers making achars. And it's exquisite, it's funny, there is the detective work, and yet, you know, it's very local, it's very India, and it's, I think, as Harini said, this local flavor is something that I really enjoy reading in these books. As our gated communities, I think what's happening is we are talking about the places we live in and the places that we are familiar with. That's a great trend. And historical fiction, Harini's work, Sujata Masi's work, even Wasim Khan, who is not writing from here, but he's writing his Baby Ganesha series set in Bombay of a certain time. I think that's lovely. It's these are entire new trends, and they're not hard-boiled detective fiction. They're nice, easy. I wouldn't say easy, but they're fun reads. They're comfortable reads, and I really like that genre going forward.
Tarun?
So clearly there's a lot happening in crime fiction. I want to narrow that down to espionage, the spy world, etc., where I actually think we don't produce enough yet. We aspire to be a global superpower. Intelligence will play a very large part in that goal. And there's no reason we can't have our own James Bond, our own Jack Reacher, and tell the stories of the great job that our intelligence services do, to the extent we can find out what those stories are. So I think that's one genre which hopefully will evolve. It's certainly something I want to continue writing in, but one that currently produces much less content than we deserve.
Okay. I mean, there's a lot of fascination with Scandinavian noir these days. You know, that seems to be the trend in terms of crime fiction. How do you all look at that? I mean, in terms of, it seems to be a trend to read Scandinavian books. You know.
Well, we just I think that there was a lot of excitement on the local flavor with the ladies' number one detective agency. That
Botswana,
was like
yeah.
more in that, the local thing, and they were beautifully written and that lovely feeling of Botswana. And that was one series I remember. And when you say Scandinavian, it's the girl with the dragon tattoo. I think that series, when that came out, that was something that made us realize that, oh my God, these stories are so local and yet they're so universal, and I want more of this.
Harini, I just want to ask you this number one ladies detective in Botswana based books. Did it inspire you by any chance to have Kaveri and stuff?
Not directly, but I love them. I absolutely love them. So that's the kind of flavor or mood or context that I would like to evocate, to bring about. Yes. So Scandinavian noir is, I have good friends who read that, including my non-fiction co-author who's heavily into Scandinavian noir. I can't read them. They're too noir, too dark for me. So yeah, different strokes. I think all of us here will be reading crime fiction, but very different kind. I love spy espionage, even if they're dark. But I cannot read a psychological thriller, which is where the Scandinavian ones are. They go, right. So each of us will have our own different flavors. Yeah.
I love Scandinavian noir. I mean, I've read them all, Jo Nesbo and all of them, Stieg Larsson and all of them. I've watched most of the shows that have come on.
Yeah.
But I don't think it influences my writing in any way. It's a very different space that I write from. But they have atmosphere given to them on a plate.
Yeah.
I mean, once you have that atmosphere out there with those long nights and those winters and all that, you just build on it. It makes half their life easier as writers.
Tarun, how do you see this?
I feel a little underread because outside Larsen, I haven't read anything else from Scandinavia. But I think that point is absolutely true, right? These stories are universal. Human experiences are universal. They're just set in different contexts. Therefore, it doesn't matter which language they're written in, where they're written. If that story appeals to a base emotion, it tends to do well across the world. That book, there's no reason that we can identify with any of what is being said in that book, but somehow we do, or that set of books. So I'll take it from there. It's just a question of, it could be Scandinavia today, it'll probably be some other country tomorrow. And hopefully at some point it'll be India appealing to the entire world in that context as well.
I just want to ask, how thick are you crime reporters? I mean, crime writers, in the sense that I have an author friend of mine.
Deaths, but they're not very gruesome. But in my other books, which are the horror books and the darker books, the psychological thriller, I go into very, very dark spaces. So I might write about stuff which I will not even mention or hint at in these books. And I don't know why I have this dichotomy in my mind, but I do realize now after your question that I do.
Okay.
Which I have to say is very fascinating for me as a writer, how you inhabit these two spaces. And I know many lovely writers who inhabit two voices. But I mean, especially Kiran's, I was telling her before this, the range of things you do as a writer is very fascinating.
I don't think I have a no-go area, but we'll see as we write more. My thought on it is, I'm going to go wherever the character takes me. But I do realize that the character is a voice that I am sort of putting out on paper. So maybe just given my own experiences, I will be constrained in what my character might end up doing or thinking. But, if it took me to a gruesome murder, a very descriptive scene of how the person was killed, I'm happy to do it. I'd explore wherever I could the character's path as far as it was possible for me to do. I think that's honesty to the character to the extent it can be.
No, I sort of agree with what Tarun's saying in the sense that you have to be honest to the character. Sometimes you don't know where that person is going to go, and that has to be authentic. But when it becomes like a cheap trick or sensationalistic or saying, let me do this because it's clickbaity or it'll get me views or, that is very sus. If there is a character and he's on that journey and that happens, because very often we don't know when we start where it will go, right? So when it's authentic in that sense, I guess it's something I would be.
And I also say it links back to that first question, right? About whether writing for Bollywood influences it. So I suspect, I'm trying to write my second novel now. The first one's movie rights got sold. And I can almost feel it, that there is a tendency to include stuff which I might not otherwise have, just because in the back of my mind, I have the hope that might get converted to a Bollywood script as well. So again, that balance between bringing honesty to your character and doing the cheap stuff that's required to sensationalize it enough for Bollywood is again going to be a little bit tricky in writing the next few novels. Yeah.
Is there any book you guys dig into, like a ritual? I keep revisiting Arthur Conan Doyle's The Hound of the Baskervilles. and Gabriel Garcia Marquez, A Chronicle of a Death Foretold. For me personally, that is his greatest book. Like that, I mean, is there any books you kind of probably go back to again and again? Like a comfort pillow?
So many, but I would go back to Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
So very different fantasy, and Robin Hobb for her entire series of the Farseer trilogy, because of the way she talks, brings landscapes alive, imaginary landscapes.
Okay.
But you feel like you're in them. Or for instance, Dune, again, which is a science fiction series, right? So how you bring, so any landscape-oriented books is where I'm going. And often for me, the landscape is a character.
Okay.
Bangalore 1920s is a character in my books. It's absolutely a character. It's not just a setting.
Cubbon Park and Century Club.
Yeah, exactly. Cubbon Park, Century Club, all of these things, right? So for me, I go back to those and I actually read. I don't want to read something in my own setting because it's going to influence how I write. But I read their settings and somehow get into the zone where I'm going to put in the landscape, and then it's back to writing Bangalore.
Anuja?
Yes, of course, I have favorite authors. And it's kind of like sniffing coffee beans, They sort of ground you and they take you back to why you started reading in the first place and then writing in the first place. For me, for dialogue, there are particular scenes, like in A Suitable Boy, there's this party scene, which is a chapter I've read so many times. It goes on for a really long time, and it's a very big party in this Bengali judge's house, and there's all these people there, and there are different conversations, and it's brilliantly done, that scene. The way they go from here, people are talking about this, someone's talking about that in the back room, then one dog is tied up somewhere, and he's got his own thing, and it's very nicely done. So there are certain writers whose work I love, especially for dialogue. Vikram Seth, he writes dialogue brilliantly. Meg Cabot writes dialogue brilliantly, for saying very things in very brief words. Agatha Christie is like the queen of that.
Yeah.
She'll describe a character in 2 lines, that person will jump before your eyes. Somebody else might take 2 pages to describe what they look like and it's all there. And she'll do that same thing in 2 lines. So these are skills that you love. There's the sense of dark comedy. I love Joseph Heller. There's nothing, it's so dark and yet it's so funny as well. And so I would go back. These are books you keep in your loo, right? And you take them out and you read like a chapter or 2 now and then, just to get that sense again. For dialogue, you can read Oscar Wilde plays. So there's a lot of stuff you go back and try and refresh yourself with.
For me, it's P.G. Wodehouse. Everything by P.G. Wodehouse. Everything. Blandings, Jeeves, whatever, the entire series. I can go back to that over and over again. There's a book by Jerome called 3 Men in a Boat.
Yeah.
Which is like my go-to every time I'm down. I must have read it a million times. Terry Pratchett, the Discworld series.
Yeah.
All the books. They're sacred. Nobody can borrow, nobody can touch. They're my comfort reading. So that's mine. I think very strongly humor.
Tarun?
I actually think of it very differently. I can't read the same book a second time. I can't do it.
Okay.
I know the story, I know the characters, and I've taken what I wanted to from that book. I don't really want to get into a deep dive. There was one exception to it, a book I read multiple times when I was a child called Call of the Wild by Jack London, which was just tremendously evocative, especially as a child. I haven't reread it since I was 19 or 20, but that was wonderful, just to hear his descriptions of what the dog especially is feeling.
Okay.
An aspiring author. I'm working on my first novel now. And I just wanted to ask you guys, what is the one thing you do to make sure that the plot twist in your book is not inadvertently revealed before it is supposed to be revealed? Like, I'm struggling with this right now in my own book, and there's a plot twist, and I feel like if I write something wrong, then the reader will know that, oh, this is the killer before they're supposed to know that this is the killer. So is there anything you guys do to make sure that the very big plot twist is not accidentally revealed?
I can take a stab at that. Let me try and take a stab at it. Without the context of actually reading what you've written, it's hard to give you a specific answer, but it is what was being said, right? You are trying to write lines imperfectly. You are hinting at the answer, but you're not really giving that answer. And I think what really works at the end of it is getting 5 independent readers to read it and tell you whether it happened or not. But it won't be your parents, it won't be your best friends, it'll have to be somebody who's willing to tell you the truth.
So for me, the process is rewriting, going over it and reworking it 1 million times, 25 times, 30 times. By the time I know the story by heart, so I know exactly what comes where, and I've not inadvertently given something away. So that's just my process.
I think it's a bit like having a dupatta over a deep neck. You know, thoda dikhao, thoda chupao. Like you have to balance it nicely and make sure you're not. You know, it feels like that. That you can tantalize and give a glimpse, but don't show everything that everyone can guess. So it is tricky.
I also have another question. Has it ever happened, like following up from the question asked about, like, do you know who the killer is before you start writing? Has it ever happened that you started writing with this one thought process that, oh, this person is going to be the killer, but then eventually changed to a trajectory and been like, no, this makes sense. This other person could also
All the time, all the time. I rewrite my plots all the time.
Yeah, the gentleman there. Yeah.
Hello. Before my question, I just want to add to what Harini ma'am said initially. I'm coming from Bangalore, and I totally agree with you. I am a Keralite who is settled in Bangalore. I'm not going anywhere. I am a Bangalorean by now. Now, coming back to the question, literary fiction. Fiction is generally a place where the context of the time, especially the political and social context, actually is being recorded in addition to what demographic or geographical details are recorded. Now, in literary fiction, you have the space to do that, like record the political happenings of the time where the plot is set in. But in a murder mystery, do you have a space to do that, to mark the political happenings or events of the time in which the plot is set in? Do you deliberately do it, or the consciousness of yours brings it naturally to your plot? So how does that work out?
So I do it, but I've learned how to get better at it over time. And what I do it is, firstly, I carve it into chunks. Like, let's say Gandhiji was visiting or something, or Prince Edward is visiting in my new book, which will be out in May. So the fact that he's visiting, someone will read a newspaper, there will be something on his visit, and that is a thing for them to talk about his, the British versus Indian divide, which is part of the story. And then in the next thing, they're talking about his coming and some other meeting is being prepared. So it's buried. Each time it's buried in a reference which adds to the story, but it is woven in as a thread through the entire setting. Whereas initially, when I first started writing, it would be 1.5 pages or 3 pages about his visit. And that's very boring. No one wants to read that.
So I would also like to become a writer someday. So there are multiple elements that you spoke about in the whole panel about characters, setting, and the plot as well, obviously. So which would you consider the most important element for you personally, both as a writer and a reader? And as a writer, how do you make sure that all the various elements in your story that they blend in together and one doesn't overpower the other?
For me, it's character. It starts with the character, and then everything sort of fits around the character and what is plausible to have happened to the character in her life. I'm talking specifically of this book. And because I don't plot, the plot comes after the character. But when one has gone through the book and one has written it so many times, and one goes, cuts out, deletes, rewrites, reworks, things sort of fall in place. Once you've done it a couple of times, you'll figure it out when you do.
I think it may be, the way it works for me is that it's different for each book. There's always something that gets you out of bed and typing. And it's different in different books. Like in my first book, it had a very strong what if premise, which was like, what if a girl is born at the very moment India won the World Cup in 1983, and when she grows up, the team starts thinking she's lucky for them. So it's a very strong what if kind of a thought. In another book, it could be a character who's obsessed with saving money. And this girl is, she's obsessed with revenge and saving money, which is the plot of another one of the books I wrote. Or sometimes the conflict or the themes is what get you excited. Someone who's a pacifist and someone who's a proud patriot, and there is love across that divide. So every time it could be a different thing. Sometimes it's character, sometimes it's plot. But like Kiran said, as you keep writing it, slowly everything comes into balance. So it might very well be a question of what you come up with first. At the ending, most of these things are important, but you sort of balance them out later, and then it all sort of comes together. So there's nothing. See, writing is a grind. It's going to be a grind. There's no shortcut. No matter where you begin it, you are going to have to deal with everything as it comes along.
See, it's... Yeah. Can I just answer that partly as well?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would imagine it's got to be based off character first, right? plots, storylines eventually are the creation of how characters are interacting with each other, right? That's what a story is. So let's take the world of espionage, for example. There is no defined plot that is being acted out. It is because a chief of intelligence, a bureaucrat are doing what they're supposed to be doing, that a plot has been created out of that. So for me, at least, it's got to be character first. The rest will just follow.
The lady there? Yeah.
See, how do you ensure that you create a detective who has literary immortality? Now, there is, we only remember Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot. Now, so many people have written, I think there was Shashi Warrior, he created a Colonel Raja Menon. HRF Keating wrote about Inspector Ghote. These people are more or less forgotten. So, do you aspire to that state?
See, for me, it was very easy. How did I create a character? I didn't create Kaveri. She actually, dropped into my head. One of my readers was saying, you had a visitation. Maybe it's a visitation. She actually dropped into my head, grabbed hold of me. And so it's something, I think when you have something that compelling. So to me, again, speaking of character plot setting, what is it that as a writer you find so compelling an idea that it will obsess you and make you write? That you just cannot get away from it. You set it aside, you come back to it. And I don't know, I think if you aspire to an immortal presence, I feel like that will bias your writing. You'll never get to it. Because you're strategizing so much to get to something that it won't happen. It has to be something that actually grabs. It's compelling to you, it will be compelling to the reader.
Again, I would reply as a reader and say that, as a reader, I love the detectives who I think, oh, even I could do this. If I employ my little grey cells, I could crack this. Or if I do a deep dive into human nature like Miss Marple, I'll crack this. Or if I'm like Kaveri, I'll crack it. So it's that. There's something in that. This is a method I could learn and follow and exercise. I think that if it's something really scientific and forensic based, then I feel I can't do this. So that's what. So I love those kind of detectives personally.
So for me, much like Anuja said, my detective is every woman. She's a composite of me and every other schoolgate mom. And it's very relatable. So I'm not looking for immortality, I'm looking for relatability. So I hope that works.
Last question? Yeah.
Hello, my name is Samyukta. You had spoken about how in a lot of Bollywood crime movies, the murder happens right in the beginning. Whereas in books, it usually, in some cases, it happens in the beginning, whereas in others, it takes some time to build up to it. So, do you think that Bollywood, in a sense, or movies in general, has an advantage of, the whole visual aspect, which is kind of given to the audience on a platter, and so they can kind of build that atmosphere and show the crime in the beginning? And do you think, a writer has to work a little harder to create that?
Yes and no, because I think the advantage also of a book is you can go away and imagine it. So the best writers, there's actually a rule of thumb that people use, which you can change, is that if you describe a character, you want somebody to be putting that character alive. So you just describe 3 or 4 things. They had a hooked nose, or they had that patch of grey hair that was wild in all directions. You will create a character, it will be different from mine. So to me, my character reading the books is always more relatable to me than the movie, because Frodo doesn't really look like Frodo the way I imagined him to be, for instance. And you can close the book, imagine him, come back 50 days later and 3 years later and still read him. A movie will not give you that. So I think there are advantages and disadvantages to me of both genres.
It's almost always the case that the book is better than the movie, right? Somehow. Almost always. And that says a lot, I think, for the ability to be able to tell your story and your characters in that kind of depth.
We completely run out of time. Lovely discussion, and this is a request to all of you to read all of them. Keep writers in circulation. We need your readers. And also read the vernacular, maybe a Pattukotte Prabhakar in Tamil, or any of the writers in your respective mother tongues, right? Thank you so much. Thank you. Absolute pleasure.